Hello, everybody. My name is Xander Elliott, and welcome to another episode of the National Podcast. Today, I am joined by Professor Richard Murphy, a tax expert who hasn't been able to make it up to Glasgow, unfortunately, today. So we are speaking to him remotely. Hello, Richard. Are you there?
Hello, I'm here remotely.
Not too remote, I hope. You can hear everything, all the tech's up and running.
Indeed, well, as far as I'm concerned, it all seems to be working okay. Whether it is your end is another question altogether. But I can hear you, I can see you, and at this moment, I can see myself on the screen.
Fantastic. So I was actually just saying to Richard before we came on air there, I feel like we've spoken a fair few times, and every time I do speak to you, Richard, there's something else out of your past that I just had never heard about before. I think the last time we were speaking about the EU, and you made a comment about how you used to previously advise the EU Commission, something like that, which was something of a surprise. So I thought we'd start today just by kind of going back over your CV. Like, how did you become Richard Murphy, tax expert?
By accident, I never meant to be Richard Murphy, tax expert. I never meant to make YouTubes, to write 5 blog posts a day, and in the last week or so, 3 or 4 columns for the National. That wasn't the original plan. I became fascinated by economics as a teenager. That is not most people's course of action. I actually became a railway enthusiast, a terribly normal thing for a teenage boy, at least at the time that I was growing up. But I wasn't interested in counting train numbers or anything like that. I was interested in the social anthropology and the economics of railways, and that fascination has never gone away. I'm interested in how economies work. I went to university to study it at Southampton. I then decided to train as an accountant because I frankly didn't believe a lot of the nonsense I was taught as an undergraduate economist. Even then, we were taught neoliberal rubbish. And I went on from being an accountant with what is now KPMG to setting up my own firm, to being an entrepreneur, setting up a lot of other businesses. But I realized at the age of 40, I'd done enough of that. And so have my partners. So we all sold out. My partners were all women, always were. I don't know why that was the case, just happened to be. And partly set up again as an accountant, but I really then became a tax campaigner. I met John Christensen in 2002, and the Tax Justice Network resulted, and I met Colin Hines a couple of months earlier or later, can't remember which now, and the Green New Deal resulted. And with John, I co-wrote something which was called Tax As If You Can. That became effectively the OECD's tax agenda by 2012. And the ideas that I had created, whilst being told by the big 4 firms of accountants by then that nothing I said about tax was credible, plausible, sensible, deliverable, workable, or any other able you can think of, became the law in 2015 as a consequence of what the OECD said. They adopted my ideas. Before then, by the way, you're right, the EU had been working with me and I with them extensively about tax haven abuse and tackling that. And as a consequence of basically delivering political economy, real world political economy, which had a real impact on the way in which tax was collected around the world, I was invited to be a professor at City University of London. I then headed a very large international project on tax abuse for several years. And after that, moved to Sheffield. I now have retired as a chartered accountant. I've retired from active academia, but I'm very active in writing and discussing all these issues still on YouTube, on my blog, and for the National. So my retirement looks about 11 hours work a day on average at present.
Jump back slightly to one thing you passed over very briefly there. This is more for myself than anything else, but the first time I ever heard of you was for the Green New Deal. Can you take us back a bit in time and explain a bit more about that and its kind of resulting consequences?
The Green New Deal was the idea, I think it's fair to say, of Colin Hines, but it developed apparently out of a conversation with another friend of mine, Larry Elliott, who was the economics editor of The Guardian for an unbelievable 36 years until he retired a year ago. I've just done a podcast with Larry, in fact, on my channel. We're good friends. And a group of people was pulled together, economists, former directors of Friends of the Earth, 3 at least of them, So environmentalists, people involved in actual practical on the ground environmental reform. And Pettifor was another economist. Caroline Lucas, who when we started was agreed MEP, not MP. This was before she became MP for Brighton. And in 2008, before the crash, and I emphasize that before the crash, we issued a report saying there's a crash going to happen. It's going to be painful. We need to take action to deal with it. We are facing crises of peak oil, potentially peak food, and peak temperatures, which we have to deal with, or peak temperature changes, which we must bring down. And this is the way to deal with the crash that's facing the world. Barack Obama was talking about the idea within 2 months of us publishing. And he went on to become president of the USA, and not to deliver the idea, of course, because that's what, in my experience, politicians do. I'm slightly jaundiced on that point. But he talked about it, and it became sort of the language of the moment from 2008 to 2010. It's now back quite heavily, particularly amongst the young Democrats in the USA. They like it a lot.
Thing that you say, you predicted the crash back in 2008, and then a few months it happened, because that's what you're doing in your article for the National today. You're saying there can be another financial crash like the scale of we saw in 2008. You talk, as you said, first got you into economics, more about the kind of herd behavior of investors and well, the hedge funds, these kind of people. I wonder if you could explain a little bit about your argument there, why you think that kind of behavior could lead to another crash.
What we've got going on at the moment is remarkably similar in many ways to the situation that arose in 1987 to a certain extent, and I'm old enough to remember that, 2000 with the dot-com boom, 2008 with the global financial crisis, and now we're seeing it again. In every case, there's been some reason for euphoria, excessive enthusiasm, ridiculous over optimism. You again choose whichever form of phrasing you like out of those. Amongst those in the city here, in Wall Street, in New York, and in other markets around the world, for the idea that there is going to be an ever rising trend in stock market prices because something has been discovered that is going to deliver the new nirvana, the new utopia. And right now, that happens to be AI. In 2008, it was mortgage backed securities. In 2000, it was the internet. And vast amounts of money tends to flow these really distorted narratives that these people create, where they persuade themselves that it's not like anything that's happened before. Nothing like 1929 could ever happen again, they tell themselves, because this time it's different, because this time there's some fundamental value. The trouble is that there wasn't in 1987, there wasn't in 2000, there wasn't in 2008. And actually, if anything, I think it's worse this time. I mean, I'm a big fan of AI. I don't know whether you're using it, but I use it as a tool to assist me. So I don't have an editor for my blog. So I basically chuck a blog through the AI, whichever tool I'm using, usually ChatGPT, just to make sure that my blog doesn't include typos, because I'm notorious for those, getting rid of contradictions, small light edits, that sort of thing, really useful. I use it to turn my scripts for a video into PowerPoint slides, which I use as prompts. I don't actually ever script a video as such, but I do like prompts to keep me on track. These things are really, really time saving for me. So I like AI. But on the other hand, the rate of return on the amount of money that's being spent on it is going to be minuscule at present, because no large company has yet demonstrated how it's really going to make them any money, except by sacking vast numbers of people. And if you sack vast numbers of people, you take those people's spending power out of the economy. And if you take those people's spending power out of the economy and don't create other jobs, and no government's willing to do that, you end up with a crash. And this is where I think we're going. I think the amount of money going into AI is vastly overinflated. Trillions literally disappearing in that direction in dollar terms. And then we have the problem that if that all goes wrong and the share price falls, and the history suggests it could fall by a third or more, which would be a £1 trillion crash. then there will be companies, hedge funds, private equity, or whatever, who could go bust. And if they go bust, then they will have borrowed money from banks. So banks will be at risk. And so we go into another round of bailout. And hey, presto, the bankers will walk away scot-free again unless we do something this time. So my argument is this time should be different, but the difference should be we don't give the bankers the same easy ride as we did in 2008. But unfortunately, the lessons of 2008 have not been learned. The banking system is still fundamentally the same. It's still not under public control. And if Scotland was to be independent, and as you know, I believe it should be, then one of the lessons should be that the Scottish Central Reserve Bank, something that Tim Rideout and the Scottish Currency Group talk about a lot, of course, and I'm a member of that group, that Scottish Reserve Bank should be structured in a way that protects Scotland from these types of fallout rather than, at the moment, let Scotland be taken for a ride as part of the UK, where the Bank of England will, once again, just literally churn out money to keep the banking system going. So we are facing a crisis. The question is really only when. The Financial Times thinks it's going to happen. The Bank of England thinks it's going to happen. Every economic commentator I read seems to say it's going to happen. It's just, when will the fools who have the money in the City of London actually realize the game is over, the dance has come to an end, and they've actually got to get out as fast as possible? Most of them will be burnt.
I saw a really interesting graph. I wish I'd kind of brought it with me, that showed the stock market against job creation over time, and the two largely track until the launch of ChatGPT, and they divide, and the stock market continues up and up and up, and job creation goes down and down and down and down. So it really does feel like, yeah, maybe there's some kind of bubble waiting to burst, some kind of crash waiting to happen. I mean, there's a lot there, and I didn't actually bring you on to speak about any impending burst because of AI, so we will move on. We will move on, but we'll have to come back to that in the future. There is a lot to unpack there. The reason that we did want to speak to you today, Richard, is because of the budget, the UK budget, which is happening later this month. Now, when Labour came to power, obviously they were elected in July 2024. In their manifesto, they said no increases to national insurance, no increase to income tax, no increase on VAT. It doesn't really look like those promises are going to hold. What's your perspective? Do you think that manifesto pledge will hold?
Well, let's start with the obvious thing, which is that the manifesto pledge was completely stupid. And there's no other word that I can really use for it. Nobody promises that they're not going to increase the three major taxes because nobody knows what's going to happen. And in fact, everything that will be said about this budget is also complete nonsense, by the way, because we are going to have a crash. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. If Rachel Reeves manages to get to November the 26th without a crash happening, and she might, I mean, I'm not saying there's going to be a crash in the next 3 weeks, but there might be. Autumn is a good time for a crash. But if she gets to the dispatch box and she announces all her measures, my prediction is that sometime by very early next year, then she will be facing that enormous downturn. And everything that she will say on November the 26th, and I'll be listening intently. I admit I'll be in the BBC studios. I've been commenting on budgets for the BBC for 15 years. Everything she says will be complete and utter nonsense because she might as well just not waste her time in November. Every single issue will be up in the air because the economy will look totally different. But if you are a chancellor, you don't tie your hands behind your back. And that's what she did. She said, I won't do any of these things, but she had no idea how the world was going to change. And that's why I say it was stupid. I also say it's stupid now, by the way, to do something else, which is to talk about actually increasing those taxes now, with one enormous exception. And that is that we undertax wealth. Generically, we are living in an economy which most people who watch our discussion now will recognize as being one which is not in great shape. It isn't. People are hard up. The vast majority of people are struggling paycheck to paycheck, and some are not even making it from paycheck to paycheck, as the data shows. Poverty is real. The wealthy are getting wealthier. People on wages are not. they are getting poorer. There is more debt. There are more children in poverty, despite every effort that the Scottish government has made, and it has stood out from the crowd in its efforts in this respect. So let's give it credit for that. But the fact is that at this moment, if she wants to take spending power out of the economy, which she will do whether she increases national insurance or income tax or VAT, then she will simply reduce the capacity of people to spend, and any recession will just get bigger. Because without spending, recessions arrive. And in fact, that's the definition of a recession. It is a collapse in spending that delivers an economic downturn, a loss of jobs, and everything else. And so, why would she want to precipitate something which is going to actually deliver, well, negative growth, a decline in the economy, and potentially a recession? Instead of actually looking at how can she boost the economy. And she could boost the economy. She could decide, and I'm allowing for all the inferences of modern monetary theory here, but I'm not going to be explaining them. She could decide that it is time to tax the wealthy more. And I wrote something in 2024 called the Taxing Wealth Report. If you really want something to send you to sleep, there's 126,000 words on tax reforms there. Good luck. It wasn't meant to be that long. It grew like Topsy, but there are over 30 outlined tax changes, all of which basically hit people who are wealthy, people earning over £100,000 a year, basically, or worth well over £1 million a year, probably over £2 million a year. And the fact is that we are talking about the fact that they are undertaxed compared to the rest of the population. And the scale of undertaxation is enormous. Absolutely staggeringly enormous. I estimated that it was 170 billion a year. Now, nobody could correct that, but I did suggest ways of collecting another 90 billion a year. And again, nobody would do that because you don't need that much extra money. But the point is, she could collect all the money she wants to balance her books from the wealthy. And if anything, and this would be my recommendation, cut taxes for working people, families who are struggling, everybody else, pensioners who need a boost, you name it. I can talk about what we need to do.
Yes, it's interesting because when we hear people like Zach Polanski has been making a lot of noise recently, the new leader of the Green Party in England and Wales, around a wealth tax. But you oppose the wealth tax, at least in the way he talks about it. Instead, if I remember the report that you're talking about correctly, it's more about taxing wealthy people in their behaviors rather than going after this pot. Oh, you've got 50 million in the bank, give us 5% of it. I suppose a concrete example would be what the Greens in Scotland have proposed recently with a tax on private jet flights, where it's not people like me or Lewis on production behind the camera who are taking these private jet flights. It's the already wealthy. So I think, is that the gist of your argument? Because, as I say, you oppose a wealth tax, but you support taxing the wealthy in their behaviors. Am I phrasing that well?
Let's be clear what I really want. I want to tax the wealthy more. Unlike just about everybody else, frankly, on the left, and I am on the left of the political spectrum, although not that very far left, I suspect. And in fact, in my youth, I would have been probably on the right wing of the Labour Party. Now I'm probably on the left wing of the Labour Party. But that's how the Labour Party's changed and not me. But anybody on the left, there is nobody else on the left, sorry, who really has actually worked for a long period of time in tax other than me. And as somebody who has done wealth negotiations with HM Revenue and Customs on behalf of real live living clients who had to settle tax liabilities owing based upon their wealth, whether that was for capital gains tax, inheritance tax, or whatever else, then I can tell you that agreeing the value of somebody's assets can be really difficult. It's straightforward if it's pretty much a residential property, because you can look at some of the websites, Rightmove, Zoopla, whatever else, find a range of properties, average them out, and say that's probably the value of this one, and you come up with a figure. If you're talking about half of Scotland, it's not quite so easy. And I know nobody owns half of Scotland by themselves, but a relatively few people own flipping great big chunks of Scotland. You try to value those with certainty when it hasn't been sold for centuries, because it's always been in the same family. Or you tell me what a work of art is worth, because frankly, I hear people who talk about some great modern works of art who say, my child could have done better than that. And then it goes for 100 million in auction. So you tell me what that work of art is worth, because who knows? Now, that's my problem with a wealth tax. If you're going to impose a wealth tax of 2%, 5%, I've seen proposed for California literally today, on people who are worth more than 10 million pounds, 50 million pounds, whatever it might be, then you've got to value all their wealth. You've got to also value the wealth of a lot of other people to prove they haven't got 10 million pounds, by the way. Because whenever you choose a cutoff, it's not obvious who's on which side of the cutoff. So there's a massive amount of work, plenty of room for disputes, vast amounts of argument, considerable expenditure by both sides, appeals, law cases, everything else. And I just think that's a waste of time. When, and this is my point, when there are easier ways to collect tax from the wealthy, just equalize the rate of income tax and capital gains tax, and I could raise you 12 billion a year. Just put VAT on financial services, because the vast majority of financial services are never bought by people on low incomes because they don't need financial services. The wealthy buy financial services. That would raise 8 billion a year. Add the equivalent of a national investment income surcharge to put about 15% extra on unearned income in the UK, and that would raise 18 billion a year. I notice Rachel Reeves is rumored to be putting this onto the income of partners in large legal firms. But frankly, even that isn't the right thing to do. They're very wealthy, but she should be putting it on unearned income, and that's earned income. We have a system that punishes people who work. And that's bizarre, stupid, crazy, bonkers, mad. I don't, again, I'll keep on rolling out the words. The point is, we're under tax income and gains from wealth. And I can find vastly more money out of the existing tax returns submitted by the wealthy in the UK by simple changes in the law that could be brought forward by Rachel Reeves in this November's budget, be in operation by next March, and a wealth tax would take years. So why on earth do you propose a wealth tax when I can get you the money now? That's my point. If they don't raise enough, then look at a wealth tax. But until you've picked the low-hanging fruit, why bother to go for something complicated? It doesn't make any sense.
I completely understand where you're coming from on that. I think Rachel Reeves maybe won't understand where you're coming from on that. I mean, if rumors are to be believed, if reports are to be trusted, she is looking at up to a 2% rise on the basic rate of income tax. That's obviously a very different route to taxing the wealthy, and once again seems to be, as you're saying, kind of punishing the working people, because dividends and stuff are going to stay exactly as they are, capital gains and all of that. But this will have a really interesting impact on Scotland because of the way that income tax is devolved. It's a really kind of tricky situation where, by giving the Scottish Parliament more control over income taxes, the UK has ended up with a Scottish and UK income tax system that is more complexly intertwined than perhaps it would have been. The Fraser of Allender Institute over the weekend, or maybe late on Friday, said that if Rachel Reeves does step forward and say later in November, I'm increasing the UK basic rate of income tax 2p in the pound, that will actually have an impact of reducing the Scottish government's budget by £1 billion. Now, this seems extremely counterintuitive. You would think tax rates go up, the amount of money available to the Scottish government goes up. But there is a really interesting table from the Fraser of Allender Institute where no matter what option Reeves chooses from raising rates on income tax, whether it 1p, 2p on the basic, 1p, 2p on the higher, every scenario results in a smaller pot for the Scottish government to spend. I just wondered if you could explain this for the lay person, Richard. Why is this happening?
No, I can't explain it. There you go. There's the straightforward, honest answer you didn't expect me to give. Why can't I explain it? Because, first of all, we don't know what's going to happen, and nor do the Fraser of Allender. And the Fraser of Allender are, in my opinion, and I stress this is my opinion, not very good at forecasting, any more than the Office for Budget Responsibility are good at forecasting. In fact, their track record is so bad, anything that they choose to forecast. You should reasonably presume the other thing will happen. And what the Fraser of Allender is assuming is that if 2p goes on the basic rate of income tax, of course, that means that Scottish tax rates will end up having to either go up, and that may be politically impossible because it would be forcing tax rates to 23% in Scotland and then be forcing higher rates of tax in Scotland to maybe 44% at fairly low levels of income and so on, which may be politically implausible for the SNP to deliver. And therefore, the pressure from the English rate of tax rising will result in the Scottish government not being able to react in a way to raise the additional tax that it does at present, and therefore the additional rates will have a lower impact and therefore less tax will be collected because England won't compensate Scotland for its loss as a consequence of the English tax rate rising. Now, that's the best summary of that logic that I can give to you. Do we know that's true? No. Do we know that this will happen this way? No. Do we know that the way in which, as you put it, the interaction between the English and Scottish rates work is reasonable, logical, right, appropriate, proper? Again, I'm coming out with a whole string of words. No, it isn't. It's completely bonkers. Nobody would design a tax system like this where Scotland is allowed to move some tax rates and not, for example, the tax rates on investment income. In any form at all, whether that be on savings, income under income tax, or capital gains tax, for example, none of those are allowed to be moved, and where Scotland can't change the corporation tax rate either. So this selective choice of rates that have been devolved is the reason why we end up with this problem. Scotland doesn't have a coherent tax system because it's not independent. And the Fraser of Allender, which is not noted for its enthusiasm for independence, is taking the opportunity to point out basically Scotland shouldn't have an independent tax system. And I think that's what we should presume that this means. They've never shown any enthusiasm for Scotland having an independent tax system or being an independent country. And so my interpretation of what's being said is that, frankly, they simply aren't interested in delivering what is required for Scotland and are taking the opportunity to have a little bit of a backstab at what the SNP has done. But do I know that they're right? No, I don't. Do I even predict they're right? No, I don't. I do, however, think that the SNP will need to think pretty hard about how they sell the message of whatever they're going to do. Do I know that the SNP have the skills at present to deliver that? Again, I'm afraid to say, no, I don't. And this is, again, one of the problems. Tax has become this difficult topic where people don't understand why and what is necessary. And Scotland hasn't been given the tools to do the right thing. If Scotland had the right tools, if Scotland could change the capital gains tax rate in Scotland now, whether or not England did, then Scotland would not even need to go near having higher income tax rates. It would change the capital gains tax rate. But Scotland is literally, Holyrood is being, whoever is in Holyrood is being asked to govern with, well, 1.5 arms behind their back, which is absurd. That's why, frankly, we have to move on from this absurd form of devolution. It doesn't work.
Do you think that the scenario, the devolution scenario, where I mean, I don't really know what to say now because I feel like you've refuted the Fraser of Allender Institute so much that if I rely on their assumptions, you might not be very happy about that. But assuming that their assumption is correct and the way that the UK devolution of income tax has happened, in order to compensate the Scottish government, or opposite of compensate them in this case, the budget would drop by £1 billion because of tax rises south of the border. Is that the SNP, John Swinney, really in a prison of his own making there? He was the one before the general election saying, we want the UK to increase tax. We want higher taxes in order to fund these public services. Have they, as I say, put themselves in their own trap there, the SNP, John Swinney?
Well, let me also just reiterate what I said about Rachel Reeves. I don't think she has a great understanding of tax. I don't think she has a great understanding of economics, even though she did study 1/3 of her degree in the subject. Let's be honest, she studied 1/3 of her degree in the subject because she did politics, philosophy, and economics at Oxford, which is not noted for its economics rigor. And I don't see a lot of high-level comprehension of tax. And I'm not getting that feeling from the SNP that they have got their head around how to really manage tax and funding within the macro economy as a whole. And they need some pretty good advice, which is not based upon, frankly, conventional Treasury thinking. The trouble is, most of their advisors are, of course, recruited from the UK civil service and think like Treasury civil servants, because that's where their training came from. And we need to think about government in a very different way and the need for funding in a very different way. And he may have been very unwise to have said, I want higher English taxes. He should have been doing, as I've done, called for a very different approach to taxation. Higher taxes on the wealthy, lower taxes on those who do not have much money. It makes logical sense. The wealthy, remember, save their tax for savings. So if you give a tax saving to the wealthy, and there's no indication that the wealthy are going to pay any more tax, certainly in this budget of any great consequence. But if you do give a benefit to the wealthy, they save it because they've already got enough to get by. That is why they're wealthy. They've got money left over at the end of the month. It follows like night does day that they're wealthy because they've got excess money. So they don't spend. And if they don't spend, they don't deliver money into growth. This idea that the wealthy promote growth is absolute nonsense. It is actually people who have to spend every penny they've got because they haven't got enough to live on who really fuel growth. And therefore, if you want growth, which is what both John Swinney and Rachel Reeves agree upon, you don't tax those on lower levels of income more. You tax those on higher levels of income more. You get your money back from the economy that way, but you don't cut the consumer spending power. You do give more money to those who will spend more and you get growth. It's a virtuous cycle. But I don't think John Swinney understands that either. So in the sense that you're saying, did he actually dig a hole for himself? As much as Rachel Reeves did, yes, he probably did.
I think it's really, really interesting what you're saying. And yeah, it seems that we're hearing a lot of rhetoric from, well, just basically from every single political circle there is right now, saying we need more out of the box thinking, we need less people that are stuck in the Westminster bubble, and more people that know real world experience, what actually happens on the ground. And then we just hear the same ideas again and again and again and again. Maybe we'll just play with income tax here a little bit. Maybe we'll play with national insurance here a little bit. Maybe we'll get the employer side of national insurance again, rather than hitting them with the employee side as we used to do. It really feels like tinkering around the edges. And it's very interesting what you're saying. Like, you're not even suggesting this massive overhaul where we go after wealth on a grand scale. It really is just low-hanging fruit, slight changes of law in ways that really could raise money off the rich without raising money off the poorest. I mean, you said even cut taxes for the poorest. I am aware that we're keeping you very, very much into your afternoon here, so we won't go any further than that. There is, as always, so much more to say on not just this topic, but as we briefly covered earlier, like AI and is there going to be a burst? Rachel Reeves' decisions. There's just so much more to say, and we will cover more and more topics on the National Podcast. So please tune in for future episodes. Thank you for listening this time, and yes, thanks very much.
Thank you. That's great. What we have to remember is one thing. We're living with the legacy of Margaret Thatcher. She said there is no alternative. She was wrong. There is an alternative. And those who are advising all these ministers have to understand that they should be looking for that alternative. They still aren't. And that's why we're in trouble. That's why we're frustrated with the SNP. It's why people in England are looking to Farage rather than looking to the Tories and Labour, because they know they're busted. It's time to actually look for the real, practical, living, working alternatives. And that's where the whole of the political system is falling down right now, in my opinion.
Fantastic thought for the day to close rather than to open that time. And we'll just roll credits. Lewis, roll the credits.